Hello, everyone. I'm Ernie Humphrey, the CEO of FP&A Webinars. I would like to thank everyone for taking the time to join us for our webinar today, Effective Cash Flow Forecasting, Working Capital, Business Intelligence, Strategic Agility. I would like to thank our webinar partner for today's webinar, Centage, whose strong committed thought leadership helps us make this webinar possible today. Before I delve into the content, I'm going to offer a few quick words about FP&A webinars, cover a few housekeeping items, and then I'm going to review our learning objectives as they offer the pillars of our value proposition to you in investing an hour of your valuable time with us today. FP&A Webinars offers webinars designed to empower FP&A success at companies of all sizes across all industries. And we only do what we do best, which is webinars. Now for the exciting housekeeping items. If you're interested in receiving CTP or FP&A credit for today's webinars, you'll have to answer all the polling questions and remain on for the duration of the webinar, in addition to answering all the questions in our post-webinar survey. If you have any questions on CTP or FP&A credit, please send an email to ernie@360thoughtleadership.com. Again, that's ernie@360thoughtleadership.com. I'd love to hear from you today, and I can take your questions at any time in the chat/questions area of your GoToWebinar control panel. I'll do my best to get to your questions during the Q&A session at the tail end of the webinar, time permitting. Fear not, if I don't get to your question, I will reach out with you directly. Finally, we appreciate your consideration in taking a short survey at the end of the webinar today, as we always strive to improve the ROI we offer our event attendees for their valuable time. So what's our value proposition for you for attending our webinar today? I want you to be able to separate cash forecasting myths from reality and define what a successful cash forecast looks like at your company. Easier said than done, right? I'd like you to be able to revise specific areas of your cash forecasting process to improve the quality of the short and long-term cash forecast at your company. And what I mean by that is cash forecasting does right, impacts decision, improves decision making. So if your cash forecasting efforts aren't informing better decisions, if they aren't offering business intelligence, which means changing actions, then something needs to change. And finally, I'd like you to be able to understand how forecasting done right improves strategic planning and facilitates business agility for your company. Now, how are we going to accomplish our objectives here today? Well, first, we're going to take a step back and talk a little bit about why cash forecasting matters, just in case some of you in the audience may need to help build that business case to invest in improved cash forecasting for your CFO or treasurer. We'll talk about some cash forecasting myths and why they're not true. And then we'll take a little bit of a deeper dive and talk about how to define your cash forecasting process and framework. We'll give you some specific insights on how to identify your cash forecasting resource needs. So at the end of the day, what I'm hoping that you'll be able to do is you'll be able to assess, right, where you're at in terms of your cash forecasting success, where you want to be, and then what it's going to take to get there. And in determining what it's going to take to get there, we're going to look at some inherent barriers to cash forecasting success. So oftentimes when I start a project, I say, okay, I'm at point A, I want to climb the mountain up to point B. Well, the good news is that oftentimes when you look at how you're going to get there, if you look at some inherent barriers that you're facing in order to reach the pinnacle, oftentimes you can remove those inherent barriers just with some conversations and tweaking your processes, and also really just looking at some of the relationships that you have internally. And then we'll shift gears a little bit and talk about how to leverage the right technology to deliver value from your cash forecasting, specifically cash flow forecasting. And then we'll take a look at some cash forecasting best practices I'd like to share that were gleaned from the Association for Financial Professionals. Obviously, they have a lot of great content around cash forecasting. So in addition to the content I offer here, today, I encourage you to also go to the AFP website. They have a lot of great content, including presentations from past conferences. And then we'll wrap things up with some final thoughts and some additional resources, and then time permitting Q&A. So why cash forecasting matters, again, those of you on the call, maybe all of you know this, but I believe that there's a few that don't. And this really just helps really reinforce why you're spending your time. And then also, you should be looking at this as the value proposition for even spending time in cash forecasting. Does your cash forecasting impact your borrowing and investment decisions as a Treasury professional at heart? Obviously, for me, When I was in Treasury, I wanted to make sure that I was investing my funds optimally. And also, when I was a net borrower, the last thing I wanted to do was borrow money when I didn't need to. Also, I definitely did not want to buy and sell currency when I did not need to. And some of that could have been avoided if I would have had better cash forecasting, better information, better collaboration. It can impact your debt covenant compliant risk. So we can use some forecasting and especially some cash flows and see if we're going to bump up against our covenant. Obviously, it impacts our working capital efficiency as we understand the timing of our cash flows. And we'll talk about this quite a bit. So where I see a great opportunity in cash forecasting, when I was back in Treasury doing cash forecasting, it was more about, okay, this is the cash balance here. It's going to be this at this day. And how do we just forecast cash? But now we certainly want to still be able to do that. But now we have much more information to understand the drivers. So as we look at accounts payable and accounts receivable, we really start to understand, we actually increase the efficiency in forecasting AP and AR due to some of the automation solutions that we see. So we really are much better able to understand the timing of payments and receipts and the flows of those. And so we're really able to make this more of it. Actually, I'd say that one inherent barrier is, given what you have, what is the accuracy that you can obtain, and that goes up quite a bit when we start to understanding our drivers of AP and AR, and allows us to forecast that cash and those flows. And what it really does, I said that pretty poorly, is it allows us to own our cash conversion cycle. So as we take more ownership of our cash conversion cycle, we can more accurately increase our cash flows and, of course, our cash at any point in time. It matters. You want to increase visibility into the sources and uses of cash associated with our costs and benefits. And so you can't manage what you can't see, right? So the visibility into your drivers of cash flow, which are definitely items that fall under your AP and AR, is definitely going to be something that's important, and that's why cash forecasting matters. We want to be able to impact our financial agility. So the best case scenario is to have that information in real time, have visibility into those cash balances, maybe that forecast, even on a daily basis, especially if you are a net borrower. And then we can also impact our operational agility. As we start to do a better job of optimizing our cash conversion cycle, it can give us more opportunities to take advantage of changing business conditions. And then also there's especially if you're a publicly traded company, there's an increased investor focus on cash balances, and also in the cash deployment efficiency. So investors are starting to say, okay, you have money. Do you have money? How are you generating that money? How effectively are you using that money? So the more that we can tell that story, right? Tell the story to our investors, the happier they're going to be, and the better understanding they're going to have of the value of our company. So just to take a quick peek, at the cash conversion cycle, as I mentioned, the more that we know and can control the cash conversion cycle, obviously the better we're going to be able to do in terms of cash flow forecasting. So what we'd seen probably up until even a few years ago was, at least when I was in Treasury, we were more focused on accounts receivable, focusing on that. So let's do some resources in accounts receivable. Let's be able to forecast that. Accounts payable, that was more of a cost center, cost of doing business. So I don't think there was as much of a focus on that. And if you look at the educational content out there in terms of technology, what you'll see in general is that accounts payable is actually leading accounts receivable in terms of leveraging technology. So I think that's kind of amazing, but it also helps us see the opportunity of, okay, what kind of solutions can we leverage out there that's going to give us better relationships with our suppliers. It's going to allow us to control how and when we pay, right? That improves our cash flow forecasting. Okay, what's going to be going out the door and why? And do we have opportunities for dynamic discounts? And then on the AR side, we start to see some amazing technology as well, and we're starting to see more in terms of AI here. How we're going to sell the goods, how long is it going to take us to receive our cash? Are we going to receive our cash? What's the timing of that? How do we optimize our relationships with our customers through our accounts receivable professionals? We'll actually be talking about that on a webinar later this week. So it's really a great time for cash forecasting. We've all been trying to do this forever, 20 years, 30 years. But now with the systems that we have, right? So we may have an FP&A, right? Automated solution, but then in addition to that, we may have a solution that automates AP and AR, and now most of those systems are cloud-based systems, and they can communicate with each other, so we can put that data in, share that data, and we can get that real-time visibility, and we can start to really look at some predictability there, right? Where in a sense, I always thought we were looking backwards. It was taking us time, even to get information on our bank balances and movements within our bank accounts, and then to go back from there was just a nightmare, and there was no communication between our ERP system and our bank portals. So now I think we have a real opportunity to move the needle a little bit, and hopefully we'll start to see more innovative presentations in the cash flow forecasting arena. And one thing that I forgot to mention is that I should have also set the expectations for the webinar. I myself have experienced dozens of cash forecasting presentations as a practitioner and a consultant, and there were times when I was disappointed. In certain cases, it was just based on my expectation. So, of course, you can already tell I'm not going to be able to fix all that is not optimal in your cash forecasting efforts. But what we want to do here today is arm you with information to assess where you're at, where you want to go, and gain an understanding of what it might take to get there, and then help you make connections with fellow practitioners who have been through the process, who might be experts in this area, and also to assess the resources you need on your journey to optimizing the strategic value of cash forecasting at your company. So what we're trying to do is we're going to try and help you assess, okay, where are you at, where you want to be, and maybe you've been doing this a long time and you've got a pretty tight accuracy. Okay, what else can you do? It should be a continuous forecast. So whether you're kind of new to the process, been there a little while, or really are out on the cutting edge, what are the best practices that are out there? What's the technology out there? What are the opportunities that we have for improvement? So let's take another little step back. Those of you who listen to my webinars know that I like to keep it simple, and that's partly for me as well. So let's set the stage just a little bit, and there's more confusing wording out there, and I think it's even more so now that we have all this technology going on. So let's just be clear. We're talking about forecasts. We'll also be talking about planning as well. So a budget is what you would like to happen. A plan is how you're going to make it happen, and then a forecast is what you think it's going to happen. So we're going to be focused on the forecast, given the best information you have. And again, we have the opportunity to have better information. What do you think is going to happen? And then I like this slide. A forecast is not a target. A target is what we want to happen, right? So a few quotes that I really like. One of them is from someone that has spoken for me on webinars before, George Bonus, said, someone call on course to hit a rock a bad forecast. Assuming it is true, it is a good forecast, even though it contains bad news. So that's one thing that we have to be willing to do. If our forecast is telling us there's bad news ahead, we need to be able to plan. And sometimes it's good if it's accurate, because if we have a level of business agility, we're actually able to respond right to that forecast. So let's have an environment of dynamic planning. Oh, okay. Now it looks like we're gonna hit this bump in the road. Maybe there's tariffs, something that we hadn't anticipated, and that's our forecast for our sales is going to go way down. So how do we respond to that? So we can't be afraid to say, oh man, our forecast is, our sales are going to go down 20%, right? That's not necessarily a bad thing as long as it's accurate. And then another great resource that I've like to leverage is from a book by Steve Player and Steve Morledge, Future Ready, How to Master Business Forecasting. I love this. I believe this quote is from Steve. If there were only one thing that you could take away from this book, again, we talked about targets and forecasts are not the same. Again, a forecast is what we think will happen, and a target is what we would like to happen. So let's take a quick look at some forecasting myths, and they are still out there. And I think these myths are more relevant for those folks who have, maybe it's just that you've just been asked, maybe you're a little bit new to Treasury, or maybe you're a Treasury leader and you've come over from another area, or maybe you're charged with the forecast, maybe you're a CFO and you're at a smaller company. So still myths. The benchmark for cash forecasting success is how close you get to 100% accuracy. That is absolutely not true, and often it's not really possible. So anyone that's done any estimation knows that you really can't get 100% accuracy. If you're 100% accurate, that in fact is a scientific equation, right? So a specific equation. So really, what I like to tell folks is you really need to look at what is the upper bound, right, of your forecasting. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but what are you forecasting? What is the upper bound that you might have? More importantly, what is the level of accuracy that's going to impact your decisions, right? So you want to look at the ROI. So on certain things, especially if I'm looking out over years, 70% is going to get me to where I need to be. It's going to better inform my decisions. It's going to cost me millions of dollars to get from, not millions, but hundreds of thousands of dollars to get to 70 to 80%. Do I really need that, right? So what's that cost benefit? And then the other myth is the more data, the better in terms of cash forecasting success. That's not necessarily the case, especially if you're using some sort of a statistical method. Let's say you're doing some basic regression analysis. The more data you pump in, the more the R squared is going to go up. So in some sense, we want to look to have a data diet, but we definitely don't want to have data overload. So we all hear about big data. So we really want to focus on the drivers that matter, right? So what is it that's driving the accuracy of what we're trying to forecast? And let's focus on that instead of trying to focus on so many different things. Now, that being said, you have a lot more horsepower out there in some of the solutions that we'll talk about. And so if the data is there, if it's good quality, you definitely want to not only identify your drivers, but also validate your drivers. So you want to be able to do some dynamic analysis of your drivers. So you want to be constantly validating those drivers. And then you also may want to test if you want to add drivers. So let's say there's going to be a change in the business environment. So you'll want to start to look at that and identify that as soon as possible. Another myth, the more complicated the statistical method, the better the cash forecast. And pretty much all of us has been doing this a while, know that that's not true. I'd like to share my little example. Many of you have probably heard me talk about this before, but when I was first in Treasury, I worked at a company that made submersible motors. Those are motors that go underground. If you're not on city water, that's how you would get your water to your house. So I came in there and I was like talking to someone in finance planning area, and I'm like, okay, how do you guys, forecast your demand for submersible motors, which is obviously a key driver of the cash forecast side. So they said, oh, okay, well, we actually let one of our product managers forecast that demand, and they showed me real simple, looks back a couple periods, puts in a weather adjuster, right? And then, okay, this is what they get. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, well, I'm going to do some regression analysis. I'm smart. I'm an MBA. I'm going to come in here and a master's degree. I'm going to come in here and blow this out of the water. So it didn't take me long. I started trying to do some regressions and Monte Carlo analysis, and I couldn't even come close to the level of accuracy. So what really matters is the variance in that forecast. What is driving that variance? If there are things that you can control, that's obviously you're going to be able to get more accuracy, but also just the knowledge, right, of how the market works. So it was only a couple key drivers, and I was trying to make it more complicated than it was. So what was driving that demand? The other myth that we still see is technology is magic, and it's key to an effective forecast. I'd say the right technology is important, and it can really empower a better forecast, but you need to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. Sometimes what I talk about in terms of technology, especially in terms of cash forecasting, would be you don't need to try and drive a Porsche, right? I'm probably dating myself, right? I'm going to do it anyway. So I might be able to drive a Pacer, right? I might be able to use a Pacer and rock the world of cash forecasting. I don't need a Porsche because I'm going to get in my Porsche. There's going to be buttons. I'm going to not know what I'm doing, and actually I'm going to I'm actually going to make the value of the cash forecast negative because I'm going to be way off. So let's take a deeper dive here. So this is going to be fairly simple for some of you, but I still like to keep it simple because sometimes it's just worth the conversation, right? Who's the main person doing your cash forecasting? Who's driving your processes? It's just something to say, okay, take your temperature, right? Are we doing these things? Why are we doing these? Hey, this is a couple slides from this presentation. What do you think about this? So especially if you're in the early stages, you want to identify the type of forecast, right? We call it duration. Is it operational, 1 to 30 days? Maybe it's a short-term forecast, a rolling 13-week. Maybe it's a medium term, might be a 12-month rolling, and then a long-term strategic. So the first thing we want to do is what are we forecasting? Well, of course, why are we forecasting it? And what is the duration? And that can really, and so it's not necessarily that we're going to have one certain way to forecast a variable and we're always going to use this. It might be that you're going to forecast certain things. So maybe you're going to forecast AR, and that's going to go into the cash forecast, and we might use different techniques. We might have different data. So you want to define the goals of your forecast, right? Is the main goal to manage your short-term borrowings? That means a shorter term, tighter balance sheet, and then maybe you want to manage your capital structure. That's more of a longer tail. But you want to look at the desired level of accuracy, as I mentioned before. So what level of accuracy is going to improve your decision? So let's say, for the sake of argument right now, your actuals and your variance is 50%, right? And it's causing you some problems there, right? So you're 50%, but you may only need to get to 70%, right? Man, if I had 20% more accurate information, I'd be able to make decision A, B, C better. And I would say that your target for your level of accuracy is probably going to go down in terms of percentage the longer out that you're forecasting. So just kind of setting the stage for success. Really you need to understand your inflows and outflows. So people always say, how do I get started, right? So this is a process that I went through when I was a treasury manager, and I'm going to show you some diagrams that are kind of dated, but I think it really helps to really show the value that can be gained in a process that you might want to go through, or if you've done this before, but just take a look at this, and then I think you should update it every year. So you want to map your cash flows, right? All that's coming in, all that's going out, all of the bank accounts that you have, all the people involved that you have. So you want to identify your inflow sources, your outflow sources. You want to identify who within your company drives these cash flows, drives the prediction of these cash flows, drives the timing of the cash flows, and then you want to identify all the systems that you're used to record, move and record fund movement. So let's go ahead and ask our first polling question. So I always say you can't manage what you can't see, right? So just trying to take your temperature a little bit. How would you describe the visibility of cash balances and movements at your company? This is really the first step to really being able to optimize the value of your cash flow forecasting, is you have to have that visibility. So I appreciate everyone's consideration in answering all of our polling questions here today. Those of you interested in receiving CTP or FP&A credits, you'll have to answer all of our polling questions here today. So I'm going to go ahead and I am going to leave this polling question up for another few seconds, and then I'll go ahead and we'll take a quick look at the results, and then I'll just share with you some of the inputs I use for analysis that I talked about earlier. And again, yours will be much more complicated than this, but I think this exercise really helped me understand the flows and what was driving the flow. So let's go ahead and close the polling question. So let's go ahead and take a quick peek at those results. We still have over 50%, 55%. At the top, good in places. You have blind spots, and then down to very limited. Actually, I thought that would be a little bit higher, so I'm pleasantly surprised to see that we had. So we got 56%. We got 44% of you good across the board. Obviously not optimal. 8% you have 20/20 vision, and that is fantastic. And so those of you that have 8%, I'm going to have to recruit you to speak on my next cash forecasting webinar, and that is a serious offer. So I love to have the practitioner expertise and the case studies. So thank you very much, everyone, for taking the time to answer our polling question. Appreciate that. So let's go ahead and get back to our content. Let's go ahead and get back to our content here. So this is just me back in the day. So you want to map those inflows, and obviously we can take it down from here. But just from the bank account level, before we start looking internally, what we had a master account. So we had our lock boxes. Hopefully we're getting away from lock boxes, especially as we start to see AR automation. Again, that's a webinar on Thursday. Very interesting what's going on there. So we had all these lock boxes. And why do we have lock boxes across all these different banks? Because we had a lot of acquisitions that we did. So, and then your electronic funds receipts, we had a lockbox in Canada. We had our intercompany receipts. So this is really, kind of the ground, right? Then you can start to see, you start to look at, okay, what are the amounts of these flows? What's driving these flows? What do we need to look at? How can we calculate? How can we estimate? Right, these key drivers of the cash forecast. Okay, what are the components of that forecast? Maybe, man, if we get a good forecast on the Chase lockbox, the BVA lockbox that usually comes in at this point in time. Okay, so that impacts our cash availability, and then maybe you can start to say, hey man, there's some lag in our cash application. So again, just take that deep dive. Make sure your Treasury team takes that deep dive. It can be incredibly insightful. And then this is an older structure. We had a ZBA account, but just look at all the different outflows that you have. Again, start with your bank activity, get your activity there, but then start to look internally, right, in terms of AP and AR, because those are going to be the things that are really going to be driving that cash flow forecast. People often look at capital expenditures outside of their cash forecast. So we had, excuse me. So for us, we had a AP payroll. We had multiple AP accounts from acquisitions. We were self-funded on medical, dividends, electronic payments, purchase cards, petty cash, short-term investments. So this starts to give us, okay, what are the key inflows and outflows? And then, okay, how do we start to look at which one of these are drivers, and what are the drivers that are driving the amounts and timing of these flows? And then just if you really want to dig in, right, if you want to, so when you're looking at all the inflows and outflows, it's also a good time to look at your risk exposures. So we used to have all these great flow documents from our Sarbanes-Oxley. I think I just gave myself the willies from saying Sarbanes-Oxley, but we all had to go through all these processes. So you start to see, okay, on the AP side, what are all these variables? So you're starting to look at what are the people, processes, and systems, and then you start to say, hey, I'm in Treasury, right? What I'd like to see in Treasury and in the Office of the CFO, I'd like to see accounts payable and accounts receivable report up to Treasury, right? We should look at owning that cash conversion cycle, and we can do that now more with the technology that we have, but also the new focus that we have on relationships, supplier relationships, and customer relationships, and the visibility on those sides as well. So let's dig in a little bit. Cash flow forecasting presentation. A lot of this framework is from a great presentation, which I have a hyperlink there. If you'd like the presentation link, my presentation today, please send me an email. I'll be happy to share that with you. Cash forecasting, a free cash flow perspective. Awesome presentation by Jennifer Dale. She's a CTP. She was a CTP assistant treasurer at Sprint. John Durtis, CPT treasurer at Conair. Steve Pollack, senior treasury consultant at PMC Treasury, and Tom Hunt, the director of treasury services at the AFP, who actually took over as the director of treasury services as AFP from myself. So I think these next slides are really getting in to some of the mechanics, and I think this is really helpful. Oftentimes I'm on webinar and it's like I said, how do I do this, right? We all know cash forecasting is challenging. Okay, what's the framework? How does this actually work? So I think this gives enough detail, but it's not excruciating detail, right, that you can't really follow along. So in terms of the framework, and this is obviously going to impact our success. So really at the top, there's really two main methods that we can use, indirect and direct model. I'll focus on the indirect model. The reason I'm focus on that is just that's kind of a preference of mine. So let's start to look at, we have with data and tools, right? Obviously, garbage in, garbage out tools, metrics and reporting, and we look at our behavior in our organization. So we centralize, decentralize. How do we control the process? Who impacts the forecast? And then we have drivers, what's driving things, the process, and our methodology as well. So indirect models top down, it's derived from the P&L. It offers more of a macro view, a look in the aggregate, and then you transpose down to the business unit. So that may be more suited for a medium or long-term forecast and leverage to drive strategy from quarter-to-quarter time frame. And then we have direct model. Here, a bottom-up micro view looks at segments by business unit, product lines within business unit, how long do you want to go, right? And so I like both models actually as I'm thinking is that this is good as well because you can really dig down into the AP and AR, and a hybrid is usually what most folks have. It's a combination of the top down and bottom up methods. Again, it can depend on what you're forecasting and the duration as well. So let's just take a little bit of a deep dive here into the drivers, process, and methodology. So you look at your horizon and frequency, just some statistics up to 18 months by quarter by month, updated monthly and quarterly. Again, if you're using the indirect method, it's more of it's not going to be necessarily that short-term forecast, but the methodology, again, this is how you get to your free cash flow, your earnings, non-cash items, changes in assets and liability, and capital expenditure. And where I see the opportunity to really drive more value in here is this, right? Trade AP and accounts receivable and accounts payable and your inventory. So I think this is where we start to see where some of this technologies can help us out. So a process might be use your business unit forecast, your functional unit, there's a consolidation, and then you want to do the variance analysis, and then you want to look towards continuous improvement. As you start to look at the variance analysis, you want to look at both the when you say positive, is it going the right way? You want it the right direction maybe for you, or the wrong direction for you. So you really want to look at both ways. So you don't just want to focus on one side of those. So maybe it's a positive variance, it's better for your company. Variance the other way might be beneficial for your company. Let's say you miss on your FX rate forecast. So we really want to look at that. And also just to point out, you really want to promote that environment of continuous improvement. So as you start to really understand your process, define your process, start to understand your drivers, when you start to look at people, process, and technology, you have conversations with folks, right? So if someone is going to be involved in the product, right, of my cash flow forecast, I want to connect with them, make sure what the method they're using, make sure it's consistent with what I'm using, making sure the data is making sense, make sure they have the incentive to care, right? So I may even want to put a financial incentive in there. If you're off, you might get penalized on your bonus, so we need to make sure we have the right incentives. And so just the behavior and organization, and I think a lot of this gets around to, okay, do we have a centralized environment, a decentralized environment? What type of internal control environment do we have? What kind of governance do we have? So if we look at the governance model, that's really what drives your accountability, which I mentioned, which you would love to have. It improves the quality of input data. So we have to communicate, right, the importance of that data. And in some cases, the quality of the input is a function of the systems that we're using. So if we're able to automatically pull data, we're not manipulating data in Excel, our systems communicate with each other, our quality goes in. Again, from my many years ago, garbage in, garbage out. And then it really can facilitate variance analysis, and this can drive our continuous improvement. And so just some of the things, obviously, the pieces, right, that we're going to look at. And then these are some of the folks that might be responsible, right, for helping us get the information, or helping us get access to the information, or helping us identify the systems where we need to push that information together and help us identify certain areas of risk. So obviously of great importance all across the board, but our business unit CFOs. But this is where again, I focus here just because I start to see so much, obviously, corporate cash payments. So if we're owning our cash conversion cycle, right, we're going to have our arms all the way around here. Obviously, we need to understand depreciation and stock-based compensation and be in line with our tax folks. But this is where we can really start. If we understand our cash payments, really the timing, how and when, AP and AR, and our inventory, our short-term working capital. We really dial in on that, and then align it with our strategic objectives. This is really where we can make a difference here. So at maybe 5 or 10 years ago, where I would have seen a lot more variance between actuals and forecasts, that would have been a function of accounts receivable, credits and collections, and what maybe in a bigger company you'd have shared services. So when we look at our drivers, AP and AR, and then of course if I look at accounts payable, I would also put HR in there, right? When we're going to have to pay our employees, so I would may not formally put it in there, but I would look at that as well. So those are where we miss, right? Headcount and things of that nature. As far as data and tools, we'll talk about this a little bit later. Do we have budgeting and planning software? Oh, I hope so. And also, in addition to that, from the Treasury perspective, we might have a TMS, and our TMS will communicate with our ERP and our budgeting and planning software. So our budgeting and planning software and our TMS, they really supercharge, right, our ERP system. And so these are things that are commonly used. And then our metrics and reporting. And this is where I don't think we see enough. Education, I think there's workshops that you can take, which are like 8 hours, or they can be a couple days. And the best ones I've seen, they actually allow you to bring your data in, right? And you can start looking at the best way to do that. And I know those types of workshops are available through the AFP. So what you want to do, I don't think it's necessarily senior management, but you want to have your business leaders or forecast leaders involved in analyzing the variance. And of course, we want them to make strategic decisions. But what we're looking for here is we're looking for our forecast leaders to deliver the information in a way that's going to help our company leaders make better decisions. So we need to be able to analyze the variance, tell the story, give the information to our company leaders. That's what we call business intelligence, right? Impacting decisions. So some of the metrics, we want to look at accuracy. We want to look at submission of forecasts, how long it takes us to put it together. Some metric considerations. Again, as we continue to improve our model, right? So then we should go in the right direction. We should continuously do that. And then in terms of reporting, annually and quarterly forecasts, maybe even weeks, for certain things, weekly. We used to forecast cash every day, where I was at with monthly views. And really what we want to do here is we want to look at dashboards, right? And we have different consumers of these dashboards. So if we have an executive, they might have different things they want to see in this reporting, as opposed to those who are really involved in managing the forecast and those that are impacting our forecast. So every day, right, we can push them and say, hey, John, did you look at your dashboard today? What's going on with your metrics? They're more down into the weeds and explaining this. Hey, John, what happened with this? So again, just interesting. Again, this is a fantastic presentation from the AFP, from the aforementioned folks that participated on that, and I like it. It's 2017, but it's still spot on, and there's a lot of awesome content in there. And when I like content, that's what I liked it, because it does a very good job in something that could be incredibly complicated. So again, what's going to impact the quality? How are you going to do it? Indirect, direct model. And I would say this should be driven in the most part, in my opinion, from the duration. And again, I like the indirect model for the longer, but as I said earlier, maybe I like indirect, but as I'm thinking about it, I think I'm going to tilt more to the direct model, just because we have that information, access to the information and the process information and everything related to controlling AP and AR and owning that cash conversion cycle. So again, things that matter, data and tools, right? The data, we want to make sure we have the data we need, not too much data. What tools do we have? What analytical tools do we have? The metrics and reporting, what's the best way that we look at managing our accuracy, but also reporting that, because what we want to do is we want to impact the behavior of our decision makers, impact that in a positive manner. And as we discussed a little bit earlier, our governance is really going to impact the quality of the information, impact the quality of the information that we get and establish that accountability. And that has something to do with our organization, which I would also say encompasses whether you're in a decentralized or centralized environment, and making sure that we have consistency across the processes that we use for inputs that we may use, or the forecasting process in general. So we want to make sure that that's consistent. Of course, we also want to make sure that there are the right incentives. We need that accountability. And then our drivers, process, and methodology. What we want to look at is the drivers that we have, what's driving the variances and why. We want to verify those, that we have efficient processes in place. Are there things we can automate in terms of data? How do we improve the quality of our data, the timeliness of the reporting? What do we need, right? Do we need to invest in AP system, AR system, Treasury systems? And then when we look at investing in technology, it's not just that we're going to improve cash flow forecasting. We're also going to improve our FP&A function and the value that we get out of that. And of course, I should have said this earlier, we need to make sure that our cash forecast that comes out of Treasury is the same as the cash forecast that comes out of our FP&A professionals. We should be working in collaboration, and those should be the same. So if you're getting two different forecasts and this isn't a centralized process between FP&A Treasury, this is a perfect place for that marriage to take place. And I think it's just going to offer tremendous value across the enterprise there if we do that. So just taking a little bit deeper look just at forecasting accuracy. There's another good presentation that I have referenced here, and just a way to look at it. So just looking at, some folks look at the mean absolute deviation just to give you something to look at if you've never really looked at, okay, how good is my forecasting accuracy? And then you want to, it's just the absolute value of actuals minus forecasted over the number of periods, and then the percentage deviation. So just gives you a way to look at that. And again, if you want to copy the presentation, please let me know. And there's a great online course that you can take, which is from my folks at Illumio, and really goes through more of the value of the forecast accuracy and how to really focus on that, and really focus on the ROI that you get from your forecasting. Let's go ahead and launch our next polling question. Just goes along, I think, with your forecasting accuracy. I'm hoping you'll share with me how you would characterize your company's understanding of the key drivers of your cash forecasting accuracy. Would you say it's limited? You'd say it's adequate, but in need of improvement? Good. It's a company becoming a key company focus. Ideal. It's under constant analysis, or you really don't know. At this time, just want to remind those of you interested in receiving CTP or FP&A credits for today's webinar, I'll need you to answer all of my polling questions. Also want to remind you that I can take your questions at any time in the questions area of your GoToWebinar control panel. So let's go ahead, in order to be mindful of our time, let's go ahead and close our polling question and take a quick peek at those results, and then we'll dive in a little bit deeper on some forecasting accuracy, just some more context around that for your reference. Let's go ahead and take a quick peek at those results. So the good news is we see 41%, 52% is good or ideal. So that's good to see, but we obviously have a lot of room for improvement. Those of you that don't know, that's your takeaway, right, from the webinar. So that's obviously key. So if you're interested in cash forecasting, you need to really understand what those drivers are. And again, a lot of content from our webinar partner Percentage, as well as myself, around how to identify those drivers. So we have 6% limited, 38% adequate. So a little bit, I don't know, I guess it's about right. I would have expected maybe a little less in the good and ideal. So I'm glad to see that folks are up on the high side of really realizing the value, and also really focusing on the drivers and not getting overwhelmed by data from their colleagues. So let's take a look at forecasting accuracy. And I think I've made these points, but it's just good to have as the reference point here. It's more about variance management than the actual percentage, right? So I hope I drove that home. So it's not like we're saying, hey, if we're 80%, we're awesome. If we're 60%, we're terrible. If we're 99%, we're the best. really it just depends on what it is you're measuring, the horizon, and is it impacting the decision? How is it impacting the quality of your decisions? And then you need to be able to really leverage your forecast. So you really need to be in more of a dynamic environment, right? Because you can have this great forecast, but if you don't have any business agility, you're not able to impact decisions. So there's really not much value. You're not using the information. You're not changing decisions. Never stop trying to improve your model. As I said, we should have a goal of um, continuous improvement. Getting better is about accuracy and volatility. Again, you want to improve your understanding of the resources and causes of volatility. And then again, you want to figure out what your drivers are, verify them, and see how they're changing. And also, when you know changes are coming in business conditions, let's start to think about how are we going to incorporate that, right? What kind of data are we going to be able to do? How are we going to be able to measure that? And then I mentioned this a little bit above, take action. Once you understand why it fluctuates, make changes, right? No decisions impacted, no value. And then again, I said earlier, forecasting accuracy, it really impacts business agility. Let's take a look and just give you someone's like, I want to know exactly, right, what the value can be. So we can use our elasticity formula. Oh, I have to confess, I have a master's degree in economics, so I'm going to have to be careful on this, not to pontificate too much. So you can use the change in X, change in Y. For every 1% change in forecast, what would have been the change in profitability? And then again, you want to measure both positive and negative effects on an ongoing basis. So it might not be 1% change in forecast, depending on what you're forecasting. Maybe it's 5%, 10%, 20%, but you look at what would have been the change in our profitability. You have to go all the way through that, but maybe it starts with, okay, what would have been the boost in revenue? How could we have mitigated our costs? So if you really want to look at the ROI, you need to tie that to those numbers. So when you look at the right method and workflow, which set the stage for success, again, this is a good review slide. I would print this out. Understand the current and intended purposes of your cash forecast. Understand your data, its sources, and the relative accuracy. You want to understand the sources of variance and focus on the sources you can control, right? You might want information on things you can't control, so you may need to put some sort of slope shifter, a axis shifter in there to take that into account. But we need to do that. And in selecting a forecasting method, what you want to you don't want to try and force a specific method. Let your data tell the story. Let your variance tell you what the right method is. Don't try and force something overly complicated. And again, this is the same point. Let your objectives drive the process, not the technology. And then this is key, and this is much easier than it was when I was back in Treasury. Identify colleagues who face the same challenges and engage them to identify the best practices for your company. You can connect with folks from maybe the same industry that you're in, have the same ERP system that you're in. So I think the opportunities out there, we'll talk about how to do that a little bit later. Just circling things back a little bit. Okay, how do we do this, right? How do I figure out where I'm at? How do I figure out, how do I figure out where I want to be? So I think we've covered that. Now, how do I get there? We'll talk about that. So you want to understand the resources you have. So let's keep it easy. People, process, technology. So resource assessment. What people do I have that directly contribute or affect cash flow forecasting and its accuracy? Those can be positive and negative. Do we need to remove people? Is it Mr. or Mrs. No? Do they cause problems? What technology that we have to provide input and output, right, related to cash flow forecasting? Do we have what we need? Do we need to improve? Again, it's not just about maybe Treasury. It's about Treasury, financial planning analysis, APAR. Some systems do AP and AR together. And then what are the processes involved in defining the process? What are the ancillary process? Do we have processes that compete with each other? How do we create continuous workflow, efficient workflow, remove bottlenecks, and make sure that we are making the process smooth? And in going through this process, how can we offer value to other areas of business to improve accounts payable, accounts receivable, maybe business operations, procurement? What can we do there? And then let's look at some inherent barriers, right? All right, we're going to climb the mountain here. Let's start to look at how we can make that climb a little more palatable to us. The people, let's look at who affects your forecasting accuracy. If they understand or don't care, big problem, right? Do you have a lack of internal support from executives as the importance of contributing to forecasting accuracy? We need to show them the benefits, and we need to get them to offer incentives to those. Maybe it's a business unit CFO of why they need to care. Let's put some incentives there. Let's tie it to compensation. That usually works. And then we have to look at people that might not play nicely with each other, either interdepartmental as well as interdepartmental. We got to play Dr. Phil a little bit, folks. So if we can take down some of those barriers, let everyone see how they fit and the value that they offer, and give them joint accountability. That usually matters. And then we can look at our processes. All these are kind of intertwined, right? But some processes, by their very design, facilitate untimely, inaccurate data. If we use Excel too much, if we have people keying in data, things of those natures. And then we look at processes that compete against each other instead of offering synergies. And then again, process again, this causes it. Someone's involved in the process and they don't understand or care what they're doing. So before we delve into technology, let's like to get a little bit of a sense of the landscape here. Your primary technology your company uses for cash forecasting, is it Excel? Use TMS, Treasury Workstation. Maybe you use an ERP module, or maybe you leverage FP&A or a BI solution. I should say CPM there, corporate performance management or other. I appreciate everyone's consideration in answering all of our polling questions here today. Again, I need those of you interested in CTP or FP&A credits to answer all polling questions. So let's just take a quick peek here, and then we'll review the results, and then we'll dive into technology and kind of look at the landscape out there, and we'll focus on what's being done in the planning tool area and relate that back. So let's go ahead, close that. Let's go ahead and share. So we've got higher than I expected, 74% of you still in Excel. So I got a big takeaway, which is to look at what's out there, right? Look at the technology out there. Just look at all your pain points. Look at the data quality. Look at the potential to automate. And so I think there's tremendous opportunity there. I'd say an ERP module, it wasn't really built. It wasn't really built for that. If you have a homegrown solution, we all know the the things that happen there. And again, if you look at the FP&A, CPM, BI solutions in conjunction with the TMS, I think that's really going to be something that you might want to look at there. And when you're investing in technology, you want to look at this at the top, right, from the CFO's perspective. So thank you very much, everyone. So just to dig into our inherent barriers a little bit, technology you might have, systems don't communicate with each other, really don't facilitate one version of the truth, right? There's no system that allows collaboration between systems. There's no way you can look at things online looking at the same thing. And then it just doesn't meet your needs in terms of timeliness and accuracy. So just some forecasting challenges, right, that you might have, and just mentioning these just because some of the tools out there really specifically address these challenges. What you want to have is linkage between your cash flow analysis and your critical business decision. It could be that your balance sheet reporting is too high. Maybe we have that medium-term forecast. Your cash flow reports are based on GAAP accounting rules, not formulas, and they're not supported. And they really most of them aren't supported in planning and forecasting for software. They're certainly not supported in Excel. You don't have a detailed insight of critical elements readily available. Again, that's data. View can't manage what you can't see. And then the development analysis of your cash flow statement is almost an afterthought, even though it's used to make really important decisions. So those are just some of the challenges. So as you start to look at, okay, let's put the business case together. Let's say, where are we at? What challenges do we have? And how do we get there? These are things, if we take care of these, that can really help us deliver the value. So real quick on the landscape here, we talk about spreadsheets. Most of you are on Excel. So just some things inherent. Do not support planning or forecasting cash flow. And we can do a webinar on Excel. I don't like to bash Excel. It has a lot of value, but I think we can do better in terms of cash flow forecasting. can't develop versions, ERP system. I would say it's just not made to do that. BPM solutions, they can be expensive. Cash flow point solutions, it has decent, effective cash flow models, but not for integrated planning and forecasting applications. There's a disconnect between operational and high-level planning. And then insight and visibility into underlying components of cash flow reporting is difficult to maintain. So how do we understand the dynamics of those drivers? An automated planning and forecasting solution, the leading ones can provide support for built-in cash flow reporting and analysis. And then they have support for dynamic links between key financial statements so you can really start to see the impacts. Support for cash flow versioning, what-if analysis, which is absolutely critical, so you can start to say, okay, what if our business conditions change? What is our what-if analysis? What if we do an acquisition? There's drill down capabilities to provide visibility right into those components. And then there's synchronization between cash flow and forecasting activities. Again, we're able to push data back and forth as often as we like, and sometimes almost in a real-time manner. So why does the right solution matter? Well, we want to be able to obviously understand the overall company vision of our company health. And so we need that point solution, which in Treasury we're most familiar with, cash flow position at any time. With better information comes a better view of this current health, as well as understanding what's driving it, right? Those health metrics, more of a high level. We talked about it ensures our data integrity. So we want to have tighter control. We have tighter control of our financial health. We're able to drill down, but also a lot of the systems provide built-in financial intelligence and rules. It takes in the financial intelligence from our G&L statements. It lets us do what-if scenarios. And then there's a lot of automation that goes on. Just think about how much time that you spend right now just moving data back and forth in between your different systems and keying that in and making sure that all gets in the same place. And that's before you even look at it. And then on the backside, there's also automated reports that can be sent out. There's places to add there's to add commentary. There's places where you can send automatic messages. And so again, we talked about this. It's really the right solution can be a complement, right? So you can avoid cash flow forecasts that have disconnected estimates with no real link to the rest of the financial statement. So it just offers greater value to the CFO and the other C-suite executives. And then it just allows greater collaboration and allows business agility. We need to be able to look at these things in a dynamic environment. So we need to, again, a key part of this is just being able to have a dynamic analysis component. So when you go back and do your gap analysis, people, process, and technology, you want to look at people. Who do you need to get on board? Deploy, is it hire? Is it train? Processes, how do we change those? And then technology, what does the right technology look like? And then in terms of our best practices, you want to have clear communication, right? You need to have business partnering, got a lot of content on business partnering if you're interested. Monitor and share metrics. You want to have that ongoing dialogue. You want to have a focus, collect and analyze data that matters, and dates and periods that matter most, right? What is our horizon? Efficiency and automation. We want to identify what can and can't be automated, and you want to automate what you can, but don't do it all at once. So some closing thoughts. You want to define the goals of your forecast, understand your data, identify and engage professional colleagues who face similar challenges, assess your current resources, identify your current barriers, perform a gap analysis, build the business case, and invest in the right technology and solution provider. So I often hear, what do I do to get started? This is a great slide to help you in that and potentially improve your process if you've already had some time in that process. So I'm going to go ahead and launch our final polling question. As we don't have time for the Q&A, I will follow up with you directly after the webinar to answer any questions that we did not get to today. Again, I just think it's a tremendous opportunity in the world of cash forecasting and cash forecasting success. I encourage you to not only look at the resources on the Centage website, but also look to LinkedIn and ways to connect, attend conferences, connect with FP&A professionals, Treasury and finance leaders as well. So that's absolutely important as well. So before we sign off, I want to once again express my gratitude to our strategic partner, Centage. We sincerely appreciate their commitment to thought leadership. We share that. I encourage you to go to the Centage website and look at the great resources that they have as well. And finally, to you, our audience, I want to thank you so much for your valuable time. I value each and every one of you. Please let us know what we can do better to help you deliver more value in your jobs. Make the rest of your day great, everyone.